From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Rare Book and Special Collections Division. I'm Mark Demunation. I'm Chief of the Division. Thank you all for coming. Loyal faces here and some new ones. This is not a college event, but as I was saying earlier, we can smell lefse in the room. So could the Olies raise their hands for me, please? All right. Couple more. Yeah, too late now. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Johnna Purchase, who is an intern here this summer from St. Olaf College, a wonderful institution in Northfield, Minnesota that produces bright, earnest, open-minded scholars. Johnna's been a dream to have here this summer, sorry. Well, actually, she's been a dream only this week. There are seats up here too, people, if you want. She has been doing work on a variety of things, working in modernist poetry, having the opportunity, most importantly, to work with the real objects that are the material culture of literature. It's just another example of what can happen here in the division. Those of you who've been to the book arts talks know that we have the opportunity for people to look at countless numbers of specimens of work, and the same holds true for literature. Johnna did some work at Trinity in Dublin before coming here, and lives and breathes Joyce, especially Ulysses, and is about to detach herself from reality and work with stream of consciousness in writing when she goes back to St. Olaf in the fall, before she goes off to what I predict will be a brilliant career. She's pulled together some materials from the collections, which we'll be happy to show you after the talk. And if the Olies would stay around for a little bit, she would like to get a picture of Oli concentration someplace before you all disperse. So are you good and ready? She good and ready? Okay. So you're going to use this instead? That one's not working. Can you do that? Okay. She's also, as you can see, a multitasker. So without any further chat from me, please welcome Johnna Purchase.
To announce in a room of librarians that books carry a significant history of their own, generated both by the quality of their existence and through society's response to them, engenders little surprise. As an English major and hopeful professor, I often study books in the abstract, as textual rather than material objects. History creeps into my studies largely as a means for providing authorial motive. The actual history of the whole book, its legal, artistic, and social history, remains the domain of enthusiasts and, well, librarians. Embarking on any study of James Joyce's Ulysses prevents such narrow-mindedness, however. A work best known in the U.S. for its notorious censorship case, Ulysses is a rare text in which the general public actually knows more about the book's history than about the book's plot. In this lecture, I will trace the long and multifaceted history of Joyce's Ulysses in the United States, a history rich in its diversity and proof of the book's authority to alter society. Throughout the process of uncovering Ulysses' profound impact on U.S. censorship law, modernist literature, book design, early American book clubs, and copyright debates, I will reference many different editions of Ulysses housed in a variety of our special collections, including the Finkelstein Collection, the Ralph Waldo Ellison Collection, and the Rosenwald Collection. The diversity of individuals that included a copy of Joyce's masterpiece in their collections serves as a microcosmic indication of the far-reaching influence of Ulysses in the United States, an abundant, if sometimes unseen legacy. In the summer of 1920, a young girl wandered into a Chicago bookshop and picked up a copy of The Little Review, a periodical devoted to modernist literature and criticism. She flipped to the newest piece by James Joyce, an episode entitled Nausicaa, and began reading. By the end of the chapter, she had grown pale, scandalized by what she had read on the page. Her innocent, still Victorian response to the concluding masturbation in Nausicaa sparked a crucial United States censorship trial and cemented Ulysses' heated reputation. The New York Court of Special Sessions tried and convicted the editors of The Little Review, Margaret Anderson and Jane Heap, for public obscenity and fined each woman $50. After this ruling, all American publishers interested in Ulysses ceased their efforts, mindful of the legal and economic burden of bringing Joyce's masterpiece to the American public. Bennett Cerf, then the head of Random House, finally renewed discussions of publishing Ulysses in the United States in 1932. Cerf realized that before Random House could distribute Ulysses, he would need to change Ulysses' legal status so that customs officials could no longer seize it, nor could postmasters refuse to mail it. Pairing with lawyer Morris L. Ernst, Cerf began plotting to secure the publishing rights of Ulysses for Random House. In order to achieve this landmark distinction, the men needed a court case. In order to start a court case, they needed to trick customs. Cerf and Ernst conspired to ensure that customs officials would open a package containing a copy of Ulysses, which they would be forced to seize. This particular copy would have critical reviews and positive comments pasted into it. These materials, as part of the seized items, could then be included in the court case. In April of 1932, Random House contacted customs officials, informing them of Ulysses' imminent arrival in the U.S. Officials acted on this anonymous tip and seized Cerf's requested copy. Cerf, Ernst, and Joyce finally had their court case. After much debate and delayed hearings, Judge John M. Woolsey was appointed to hear the case of the United States of America versus one book called Ulysses. Woolsey left for a vacation to read Ulysses and other critical texts on Joyce's masterpiece, and upon his return, delivered his radical statement. On the 6th of December, 1933, Judge Woolsey lifted the American ban on Ulysses. This only 3 weeks after the repeal of Prohibition. You can imagine the celebrations they had at Random House. The United States took Ulysses to a second court of appeal, but Ulysses' ruling was upheld. Judge Woolsey's ruling remains remarkable today for 2 reasons. 1, it's setting a new precedent for evaluating materials in censorship trials, and 2, its insightful literary analysis of Ulysses. Woolsey argued that it is only with the normal person that the law is concerned. Woolsey broke from tradition by asserting that a work's pornographic effect must be evaluated based on its impact on a person with average sex instincts, who serves as the hypothetical regent, like those used in other courts of law. The important criteria for determining whether a book should be censored for the public good should be based upon the way it would disturb or not disturb a regular member of society, not someone especially delicate or young. Woolsey intuitively, yet radically, suggested this criteria. Woolsey also continued the practice of evaluating a text's obscenity based on the book as a complete work, instead of only appraising isolated parts of the questionable material. Decades later, censorship cases consistently returned to Woolsey's criteria for determining instances of obscenity. Aside from the important legal applications of Judge Woolsey's ruling, his statement provides an insightful contemporary analysis of the text itself. He offers a thoroughly Joycean description of the text. Joyce has attempted to show how the screen of consciousness, with its ever-shifting kaleidoscopic impression carries, as it were on a plastic palimpsest, not only what is in the focus of each man's observation of the actual things about him, but also in a penumbral zone residua of past impressions, some recent and some drawn up by association from the domain of the subconscious. In other words, Joyce portrays human thought especially convincingly. Woolsey highlights Joyce's sincerity in showing how his characters think, and points out that if one does not wish to associate with such folks as Joyce describes, that is one's choice. He lauds Joyce's full commitment to depicting the lives of the lower middle class, understanding the necessity of including dirty, old Saxon words and coarse fantasies. When Woolsey's statement became public, reporters, critics, and publishers paid special attention to the fine literary care Judge Woolsey had taken to defend Ulysses. The case itself had already generated publicity for Bennett Cerf and Random House, but the second wave of excitement over Judge Woolsey's thinly veiled praise proved an even greater boon. Not only did Woolsey value the legal implications of his ruling, but he lent his authority to support Ulysses as a text fully realizing the modernist literary experiment. Joyce began this experiment halfway through the literary modernist period, a period beginning roughly with World War I and ending with World War II. The first and only publication of the magazine, Blast, marked the start of modernism as co-collaborators Ezra Pound and Wyndham Lewis challenged dominant ideologies and typological styles with their modernist manifesto. Not only did Blast promote an alternate modernist method for combining words and describing society, but through Lewis's artistic vision, Blast pioneered a modernist approach to typography and design. Ezra Pound coined the phrase, "make it new," as the modernist rallying cry. Virginia Woolf, an arguably more enduring modernist author, more mildly but equally radically explained the duty of the modernist as one of depicting the ordinary mind on an ordinary day. John Updike, a respected postmodern author and critic, described modernism as art for its own willful bourgeois baiting sake. Modernists dissolved and reassembled existing literary conventions as they strove to communicate the subjectivity of time and the incoherence of human thought. Modernists probingly delved into the psyche of their characters while also bending and examining their patients' experience of time. The publication of Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859, of Freud's prolific psychoanalytical works beginning in the 1890s and ending in the 1940s, and of Jung's extensive writings on analytic psychology in the early to mid-20s, sparked a new wave of fascination with the idiosyncrasies of the human mind that lasted well into modernism. This obsession pushed modernists to experiment with new literary methods of depicting human thought. The stream of consciousness technique was born. Similarly, Einstein's theory of general relativity, posited in 1907 and again in 1915, totally smashed previous ideas about space, time, and reality. The general air of excitement and unease about science's newfound muscle captivated modernists in their pursuit of aesthetic methods adequate for understanding their modern industrial world. Joyce shared these fascinations with his fellow modernists, dissecting questions of human thought and perception of reality with his own heavily stylized approach. While some may still consider portions of Ulysses obscene today, original reactions against the novel may have had as much to do with discomfort over depictions of masturbation, defecation, and first sexual encounters as with unease over Joyce's unorthodox approach to language. Told through a series of episodes named after those in Homer's Odyssey, Ulysses follows a day in the life of Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus. Joyce uses the narrative structure of Homer's Odyssey to organize the day, weaving in elements of Hamlet and the Bible to create the great epic of ordinary man. By making this comparison through his 644-page epic, Joyce implies the ordinary man lives a life as heroic as the Greek warrior Ulysses. Bloom is not a typical hero, however. Perhaps he is more worthy of the title unhero, or even anti-hero, as a Jewish-Irish man afloat in his Dublin home and unable to culturally fit in with his rougher, more gregarious Irish co-workers. His wife's blatant infidelity and Bloom's love of simple routine makes him an even more pitiable character. Joyce remains unclear throughout his Epic of Bloom whether the work is a satirical mock epic or if Ulysses is meant to champion the modernist insistence on the supreme significance of modern life. This ambiguity alludes to the fine line between the pathetic satire of life and the true nobility of modern existence. The precarious diversity of styles Joyce employs for each episode further affronted the literary world. In a book that moves effortlessly from stream of consciousness to the newspaper entries of Aeolus to the musical poetry of Sirens to the fantastical play of Circes, the cohesive, linear storytelling of Western literature prior to modernism crumbled. Consider works prior to Ulysses, and the most innovative technique they use is the flashback. While the flashback does disrupt time, a classic example of this is Frankenstein, the flashback was used to clearly and linearly recount an event in the past. Ulysses incorporates the flashback as part of individuals' memories, but time undulates at varying speeds and in multiple directions throughout each character's mind. Joyce undoubtedly pushed the boundaries of literature, relying on key modernist principles such as the unflinching representation of mundane life and nonlinear storytelling. Departing from tradition with his experimental literary techniques, Joyce captured a regular journey through Dublin on an uninteresting June day. Perhaps his poetic brutalization of literary conventions, rather than his obscene passages, truly disturbed his critics. Less noted, but also innovatively modernist in its design, the various editions of Ulysses heralded a truly modernist object. The 1922 Shakespeare and Company first printing of Ulysses produced a teal-colored tome described by a Parisian critic as a book as large as a telephone directory or a family Bible, and with many of the literary and societal characteristics of each. After Joyce's failure to secure a publisher, the proprietor of the little Parisian bookstore, Shakespeare and Company, and Joyce's friend, Sylvia Beach, finally offered to publish Ulysses. A severely limited budget resulted in a poorly bound volume in distinctive teal wrappers. Readers were encouraged to rebind the book in a much sturdier cover. The reader who left his or her Ulysses in its wrappers literally experienced the book falling apart as Bloom's day trudged into night. Equally as iconic as the 1922 Shakespeare and Company Blue Book is the title page of the 1934 Random House first American printing of Ulysses. This austere, enigmatic design by German-born artist Ernst Reichel has served as a synecdochal image for all of the layers, obscurities, and intractableness of Ulysses, an elusive and thoroughly modernist juxtaposition. When merely gazing at the cover of the 1934 Random House Ulysses, one feels trapped by the bars of letters vivisecting the page. These spindly lines create a maze-like atmosphere with a red rectangle marking the spot, James Joyce's name in the middle of the labyrinth. Turning into this labyrinth, the reader is confronted by the two-page spread for the title page, in which a massive U fills the verso page. To what is this peculiar typographic choice alluding? The truly epic grandeur of the seemingly non-heroic Ulysses? The all-encompassing experience about to be read? This typographic motif continues as each chapter begins with a single page-filling initial letter on the verso page. Evocative of decorative initials used as far back as the early medieval period, Reichel's modernist iteration echoes the historical relevance Ulysses strives to maintain, while providing a sleeker, streamlined modernist solution to the pageantry of the past. Subsequent Random House editions provide reimagined renderings of the simple utility of Reichel's original. The 1946 cover, redesigned by Reichel, continues to emphasize the relationship of the title to its background, symbolizing the relationship of the novel's Ulysses, Bloom, to his Irish surroundings. This time, Reichel imagines a floating word lost in an indistinct background. The added color of the title and the strange gradation in text sizing creates a visual image that extends the prominent title page and initial letters used throughout the work. The 1986 cover design, this time reworked by Karen Goldberg, offers the most colorful of Random House designs. This cover both echoes the initial letters and the structural vitality of the 1934 cover, reappropriating the thin, maze-like lines with thick, industrial blocks of color. Finally, the 2002 cover design returns to the original 1934 design, completing the design arc, for now, of Reichel's revolutionary book design. Engaging as these covers may be for the contemporary reader of Ulysses, Reichel's design articulated the highest form of modernist typographical design. The coupling of utilitarian styles with elements common to the book, such as the famous initial letters, established a new method for book design. Reichel's influence both at the design firm H. Wolff Manufacturing, one of the largest book manufacturers at the time, and throughout the book design world reached well into the 1960s as other illustrators sought to negotiate Reichel's use of text, color, and location to figuratively imagine the novel. Another remarkable cover, Paul Bacon's 1961 Catch-22, continues Reichel's austerity and devotion to the title. Avant-garde print collector, theater impresario, and book designer Merle Armitage later lectured on Reichel's design as a salient break from tradition and as the start of a new school of thought. Armitage himself explored Reichel's two-page title page in many works, including books on Martha Graham and George Gershwin. The unparalleled unity of design and the articulation of a single artistic movement achieved in Reichel's design of Ulysses influenced the next generation of book designers as they sought to strike their own modernist and later postmodernist mediation between text, design, and illustration. Only 1 year after Reichel's groundbreaking design for the first American publication of Ulysses, George Macy designed a second edition of Ulysses that further affirmed its place as seminal modernist text and challenged the scope of early American book clubs. Harry Sherman founded the Book of the Month Club, the first American book club, in 1926. Based off of the 1919 book club model pioneered in Germany, for an annual fee, Book of the Month Club members could order a number of contemporary texts recommended by a panel of experts. As a growing American middle class developed throughout the 1920s, suddenly able to enjoy leisure activities, and finally secure enough to purchase luxury goods, book clubs appealed to individuals looking to invest in highbrow culture. Reading and displaying literature tangibly demonstrated one's refined lifestyle to house guests. By 1929, the Book of the Month Club distributed over 110,000 titles for eager consumers. George Macy strove to distinguish his company, the Limited Editions Club, from other annual book clubs on the market. Rather than printing flashy new titles, Macy printed illustrated luxury editions of the classics with a smattering of contemporary books destined to become classics on their own. Each printing consisted of 1,500 copies, a much larger number than the standard 250 copies common to other limited editions book clubs, but much smaller than the 110,000 copies printed by Sherman and others. Macy often remained heavily involved in each printing, but his extraordinary creativity in imagining Ulysses makes it the most coveted title printed by the Limited Editions Club. The 1935 Limited Editions Club printing of Ulysses is a rare edition in which both the author and the artist dominated his respective field. This unique printing paired James Joyce with the esteemed Fauvist, Modernist, and Impressionist artist Henri Matisse. While the coupling of two great artists made sense commercially and aesthetically, the temperaments of Joyce and Matisse left the duo in a constant flux of amicable collaboration and artistic frustration as each tried to exert full artistic control. For the final product, Macy exercised his own editorial control and brilliantly chose to incorporate Matisse's earlier studies into the book, binding the smaller sketches on top of the final illustrations. Not only do the indistinct, billowy images capture the lack of lucidity experienced throughout the novel, but the reiterations of the single illustration articulates the mutability of individual understandings of reality central to Ulysses. Matisse's illustration, while complementing the atmosphere of the novel, also provide a jumbled antithesis to the novel's events. It remains unclear exactly how much of Ulysses Matisse read prior to illustrating it, but Matisse never read the work in its entirety. Instead of basing his sketches on actual events in Ulysses, Matisse chose to depict images from Homer's the Odyssey. A reader looking for a literal depiction of the Aeolus episode, in which Bloom goes to work at the newspaper agency for which he sells ads, will puzzle over a connection between the text and Matisse's depiction of Odysseus battling the winds his crew inadvertently released from Aeolus's bag. The tiny, stick-like figure nearly swallowed by the shaded background, lost in the swooping curves dissecting the page, does, however, reimagine Bloom's feelings of isolation amidst the churning chaos of his office. A more rigorous example of the metamorphosis of Matisse's illustrations is the Circe episode image set. There are the sketches, and that's the final. He ended up flipping the image. Ultimately, Joyce's layered, heavily constructed text, juxtaposed with Matisse's essentialized illustrations, represents the lush diversity within the modernist aesthetic principles. Joyce represents the confused, elusive, and progressive existence of man. Matisse demonstrates the unfocused abstraction inherent in the modern world. Moving beyond the bounds of literature, typography, and design, Ulysses further focused its modernist energy with fine art. Despite the literary and artistic attention awarded to Ulysses, the legal tensions that marked the advent of Ulysses' incorporation into American culture continue to this day. A central argument about Ulysses debates the actual legality of Random House's copyright claim to the text. The crux of the dispute focuses on whether a text once given to the public domain can be recalled and copyrighted. Under the 1909 U.S. copyright law, any author wishing to apply for copyright was required to send a copy of his or her work to be stored at the U.S. Library of Congress with an application registering his or her claim to the work. An author first published abroad had a grace period of 60 days between the first publication of a work and the deadline in which to submit materials to the Copyright Office. Unfortunately, customs officials were ordered to seize the still deemed obscene Ulysses upon its arrival in the U.S. If a copy managed to sneak through customs, however, the postmaster would refuse to mail it, claiming the book unfit to mail. Even had Joyce tried in 1922 to obtain U.S. copyright for the Shakespeare and Company first printing of Ulysses, the novel and application would never have reached the Copyright Office. Bennett Cerf chose to ignore this legal quirk, and after winning the landmark case, United States versus one book called Ulysses in 1933, immediately applied for U.S. copyright of Ulysses, even though the text could technically be considered part of the public domain. In his application for copyright, Cerf included a copy of Judge Woolsey's statement and a copy of a letter from Joyce to Cerf briefly detailing the publication history of Ulysses prior to the 1933 trial. These items were included in the copyright application, granting Random House editorial rights to key historical documents relating to Ulysses. Cerf also urged Joyce to submit a copy of a special reference chart. The chart provides a list of characters, a brief critical review, and a chapter-by-chapter synopsis of each episode. These copies were made exclusively for Joyce's close friends and admirers. Joyce flatly denied Cerf's request on aesthetic principle. However, those materials included in the original 1934 copyright application, Woolsey's judge's statement, and Joyce's letter to Cerf, were printed in every subsequent Random House edition, excluding the 1986 Hans Gabler Vintage Books edition. The estate of James Joyce claims a 1934 U.S. copyright for Ulysses, which means that the novel's copyright would originally have expired in 2010. However, if Ulysses truly earned copyright in 1934, revisions to copyright law under the 1976 Copyright Act would extend Ulysses' copyright an additional 20 years, resulting in a 95-year period of copyright ending in 2030. In a compelling article published in the Yale Law Journal, Robert Spoo actually argues against this extension of Ulysses' copyright. The main premise behind his argument is that works kept under copyright for many years cements the monopoly on a text, discouraging the publication of alternate versions proposed by American scholars and artists. Random House's monopoly on Ulysses also artificially depresses the market for modernist works. When more editions of challenging works like Ulysses are more widely available, the demand for such works increases as more readers are willing to take the cost. Finally, Spoo argues that the public domain promises a rich afterlife of unimagined creativity for works no longer jealously guarded by copyright. However, this bold claim oversimplifies the diversity of rich afterlives a book can enjoy and focuses too narrowly on the value of the text alone. A text's fertile afterlife begins long before it enters the market and only intensifies its productivity once on the market. For example, Professor of English at Boston College Joseph Nugent and students created an app titled Joyceways, which takes users to over 100 locations from the novel to hear excerpts, to read literary criticism, and to view contemporary photographs, advertisements, cartoons, and posters. In 1963, the fine press Oriel Press reprinted an essay by Holbrook Jackson, written for a Parisian newspaper in 1922, commenting on the first publication of Ulysses. In 1967, a British-American film entitled Ulysses went on to receive an Oscar nomination for Best Screenplay. And as this presentation has sought to explore, the American publishing history of Ulysses has left a profound impact on modernist literature and literary techniques, typography, book design, early American book clubs, and fine art. Ulysses even profoundly rewrote the criteria used for evaluating obscenity and determining censorship in the United States. Left with this staggering legacy, Spoo's claim that copyright stifles a text's creative impact seems narrow-minded and simplistic. Yes, copyright of Ulysses limits the way in which other authors and artists may use the text, but the sphere of copyright values the book solely for the words sandwiched between the cover. The publication history of Ulysses demonstrates how the value of a book extends far beyond the ideas on the page, however revolutionary they may be. In a twist of staggering proportions, Joyce's epic continues to resonate through the ordinary lives of ordinary individuals like us. The next time you flip open to a multi-page title page, or journey through a myriad of literary styles in one text, or read a shocking, brilliant book you can't imagine your grandfather allowing in the house, remember James Joyce's and Bennett Cerf's tireless efforts to infuse Ulysses in American culture. Beyond the important literary legacy of Joyce's masterpiece, Ulysses dynamically affirms the significance of the book as a cultural object, demonstrating how the whole book can radically shape our society. Thank you.
have time for questions from anyone. And while you're conjuring questions, I will point out there are materials on display, including the 1922 teal-covered Shakespeare Press edition of Ulysses, and some fine press editions over here. Also, and we'll be happy to show you, as you often hear me, we'll be happy to show you anything you'd like to see. Over here in this box is a very rare and very important piece from the collections, which is the Death Mask of James Joyce, one of 3 known copies. Done in plaster. So I warn you, it is a death mask. It can be disturbing, but we'll be happy to show that to you as well. Questions from people? Good.
From hearing what you said, it seems that a lot of women were brave enough to be the early publishers of James Joyce. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, so the question is about women and their role in publishing for James Joyce. So women in general were particularly involved in the modernist movement. There's the famous Bloomsbury group where you have both Virginia Woolf and her sister that are working. And then at this time period, again, it's the 20s, so women are feeling more liberated, taking on new roles. And so they're doing things like Sylvia Beach opening her own company, the Shakespeare and Company. And then in the US, again, women, they're wanting to be independent, do their own work. And so you have Margaret Anderson and Jane Heap running the Little Review. So I think it's a good time in general for women to be going out and to starting their own work. They want to do something perhaps a little edgy, something that's new. And so James Joyce is a great person to try that with. Yes?
The little girl was shocked by the Little Review in Chicago. How did the court case come to be in New York?
That's a good question, actually. I think she was visiting Chicago, and that's when she picked up the episode in the bookstore. But she was actually from New York. The Little Review was also sold in New York as well. And so it made sense then there was a special sessions being held, and so to bring the case at that time.
Did the American decision to lift the censure of Ulysses impact other national decisions to lift censorship on it?
Well, that decision, it went twice to the second round of federal court. And so once that decision was made, it was made for the entire nation. And so even though it didn't end up going all the way to the Supreme Court, once that ban was lifted, that court had the authority to say you can't ban it through customs, through mail. School districts still, if they wanted to ban it, although I don't imagine school districts at the time were assigning Ulysses for reading. I don't know, that'd be quite intense. But so it wasn't, it went for the entire nation.
Right, other nations.
I see what you mean. I see. Well, the Americans were more progressive than the Brits this time around. And so it took them a few more years after us in 1936 to then allow Ulysses. Ireland took a few more years as well. So we really were the first after Paris allowed it, and then Europe started getting on the bandwagon.
Well, I understand from what you were saying about the copyright that it's still sort of a legal dispute as to whether it's covered by copyright or it's not.
It is. No one really is willing to take on Random House at this point. There are actually 2 presses that have printed their own editions of Ulysses, 76 and then I think in the 50s, but they priced them very expensively, and so Random House kind of let that slide because it wasn't really in competition with their editions, but it is technically a dispute, and so if someone wanted to take the trouble of taking Random House to court, they could.
Did you find that some of the negative attention towards the book inspired some other people to look at it? I mean, did that help in the long run?
Yeah, for sure. I think that helped actually get contraband copies of Ulysses over in the US, and then hopefully rebound copies were circulating, so they weren't falling apart. But it did then become kind of this cult item that was being passed around through different literary circles, and then the Little Review also adding some attention to it.
So the Little Review was publishing each chapter seriatically, yeah?
Yeah, so Ulysses actually started out in a serial form, and Joyce later decided he was going to put it together into a novel, and some of the episodes he really extended from what was published, but originally, again, it was in an episodic form, so you would have Nausicaa maybe published, and then Aeolus. The last few episodes in Ulysses were not ever published in a magazine prior to the novel, but originally it was kind of abstract little glimpses, which in some ways makes more sense since each episode is a totally different style.
How did the work that you did here at the library support what you did when you were the last year in school?
Yeah.
How do you intend to develop it next year?
Yeah. So like Mark mentioned, this past fall I was studying at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, which is actually not Joyce's home university. That's University College Dublin. But being in Ireland, I was being exposed to it. I read more Joyce. I took on the Portrait of the Artist, not Ulysses. It was too big for my suitcase. But so I was living in the culture, and I was understanding the geography of Dublin and also the way that the Irish talk, and learning the history. I was in a history course as well while I was there, which then prepared me really to take on Ulysses. They'll have some compendiums for Ulysses that are solely just about, here are maps, here's the history, these are the jokes that they're making. And fortunately, since I was living in Ireland, they would reference a street corner. There's actually one in there, it's called Leonard's Cross, and that's the cross where I lived in Dublin, so I could go, I know exactly where that is. Like, I have a picture on my phone. So I could really trace where Joyce is moving throughout the city. And then also understanding, Kathleen O'Houlihan and some of the more older references that they make to culture in Ireland. And then this fall, I'm doing independent research on the stream of consciousness technique. And so this preparation has helped me, I think, understand better the context in which Joyce is coming up with stream of consciousness, but it also gives me a more profound understanding of the various other literary techniques that Joyce used in Ulysses and the way he combined those, and then society's response to this kind of weird combination, to help better understand what Ulysses really was doing throughout the modernist legacy. I did not. No, I didn't.
I was just there a few years ago when I was there. I expected it to be full of villas and everything like that.
Uh-huh.
It's exactly the way it was described.
Yeah.
As of, what was it, 1898?
Yeah.
The incidents took place.
Yeah.
It's still that way, at least it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. Ireland doesn't have a lot of new building projects, so everything stays about the same, which is good. Yes, the Martello Tower still is there, for sure. Yeah.
Why don't you join me in thanking Johnna again for her talk?
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.